Killer Innovations Podcast for Sunday, December 18th, 2005. Show number 40, coming to you from Washington, D.C. Hi, and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Phil McKinney. Before we get started, please keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine alone, and do not necessarily reflect those of my past, current, or future employers. Well, I've got a crazy week coming up, so I'm going to try to pull this together on Sunday afternoon. I'm actually back in Washington, D.C. for at least a few days. I actually have to go back to California, so I'm going to try to squeeze this in today, try to get it up posted, and therefore not try to squeeze it in with all the travel. Thanks for all the votes on Podcast Alley. If you have not voted, please visit podcastalley.com, post your comments, your feedback, and vote for your favorite podcast. It is the quickest way for you to let the podcast producers know that you really do appreciate the work that they do for you. Thanks for all the feedback. You can leave me feedback by dialing the feedback line at 703-636-4460, or you can drop me an email at podcast@killerinnovations.com, or you can Skype me at Phil_McKinney. I do have one listener feedback, at least one that I checked a couple days ago. If there's any others, I will also add them at the end of this podcast. So stay past the end and listen to whatever feedback has been posted on the voicemail feedback line. Also, don't forget to vote for the new logo. And again, some of you keep correcting me that it's really not the logo, it's really artwork. But this will be the album cover work that will appear on iTunes. So we're going to come down to the end here. I'm going to try to wrap up voting in early January, make the final changes to the artwork, and then get it posted. If you'd like to vote, you can just visit killerinnovations.com. Scroll down, you'll actually see one of the sample pictures. Click on the picture, it'll take you to the location where you can actually cast your vote. Okay? So, this week's show, we're going to talk about some alternative techniques on how to generate ideas. You know, we've been talking in the past about using, killer questions, etc. And sometimes, even with killer questions, you come up with an idea, but you're looking for variations. How do you derive variety or variations to ideas? So what I'm going to share with you is a technique that I call the Vinci technique. This has been written up by a number of the creativity writers that are out there, but it's one that I've used quite often, and I've actually have developed some slight variations to how I apply it. But again, hopefully you'll find it useful for what you're working on. So the basis for the Da Vinci technique is really, if you look through the Da Vinci notebooks, you'll see, for instance, a variety of drawings that Leonardo drew that had very grotesque sizes of noses and chins and eye sizes, and they were not traditionally what you would think of as being, a drawing of a traditional human face. Well, what Da Vinci was experimenting with was creating these caricatures based on random variations of the human face. And basically he took the features of a face and came up with a wide variety of how they looked, sizes of nose, placements of the eyes, etc. So he would list, for instance, the facial characteristics, head, eyes, nose, etc. And then beneath each of these, he would list variations, size, color, shape, etc. For instance, if you look, if you came up with your own list and you listed out all the characteristics of the head, it would be heads, eyes, noses, mouths, chins. And then underneath it, each one of these, he would list the variations. So, for instance, under chins, it could be a double chin, it could be a slack jaw, it could be a sagging, it could be a angular chin, it could be a chunky chin, it could be a receding chin. And then what he would do is through each of these variations, he would randomly connect one characteristics of head, eyes, nose, mouth, chin, and then would draw the face that corresponded to. And as a result, he was experimenting with looking at variations and recognizing detail, which is always a problem when people are working in the areas of creativity. We tend to gloss over detail and look at the final form and function, not what actually makes up the form or function. So, if you were to apply this technique to a variety of activities that you've got going on, then you could come up with a whole set of ideas that potentially could break you through to finding something that you originally hadn't thought of. So what would happen was Leonardo would analyze the structures of subjects and then separate the major parameters. Now these parameters in the case of the head, or in the case of drawing faces, would be heads, eyes, nose, mouths, and chins. In the case of whatever it is that you're working on, you could apply it to that subject also. So again, he would separate the major parameters, so factors, variables, however you want to break it up, and then he would list variations for each parameter and then randomly combine them. Now, to use the Da Vinci technique, here's basically the process. One is specify the challenge that you're trying to do. In this case, Leonardo was trying to draw a variety of different kinds of faces. Step 2, separate the parameters of the challenge. The parameters are basically the fundamental framework. So if you choose, things like you want to create a better car, what are the characteristics of a car? It has to have an engine, it has to have some mode of moving it forward, whether that be wheels or the ability to drive movement. You have to have the ability to contain or hold passengers, whatever the case might be. Then you choose the nature and the number of parameters that you wish to use in your set. So a good question to ask yourself when selecting the parameters is would the challenge still exist without the parameter I'm considering? So could you have a car that could not transport individuals? Could you have a car that had no means of movement? Could you have a car that could not motorized? Now you could have a car that didn't have headlights, for instance. So thinking about all the parameters that make up the challenge, in this case defining a car, then that defines the set or the functions. So again, referring back to what Leonardo did, he defined drawing the face as having the parameters of a head, a set of eyes, a nose, a mouth, and a chin. And with those, he felt that he could define the whole variety of possible faces out there for him to draw. Then, below each parameter, list as many variations for the parameters as you wish. You can have the list be fairly short, you can have it be relatively long. The complexity of the list is determined by the number of parameters and the number of variations used. So for instance, if you had 5 parameters, head, eyes, nose, mouth, chins, each one of them you listed 10 characteristics. So again, chin, double chin, slack jaw, sagging, angular, receding chin. You can quickly figure out that if you ran through all the variety of combinations, you have literally an explosive number of ideas that could potentially lead into you creating something truly innovative. So then when you're finished listing the variations, make random runs through the parameters and the variations of the parameters. So pick one head, one eye, one nose variety, one mouth variety, one chin variety, and now draw that picture. And in the case of the example from Leonardo. And if you select one or more from each column, you don't restrict it to one. You could potentially have multiple variations that you could combine to come up with some very creative options or ideas for whatever it is you're working on. If you're working with 10 or more parameters, you may find it helpful to randomly examine the entire group and then restrict your options. You start getting into large numbers, it just becomes hugely complex. So, hopefully you've followed this concept, but let's walk through an example. In this case, we're going to use an example for car washes. So, what are the parameters for a car wash? Well, you have to have a method of the wash. You have to have the kind of products that are washed in the wash, what equipment is to be used, and then what additional products you could potentially sell within the car wash. So, back to method. What are the methods of car wash? Well, it could be the full service, it could be self-service, it could be hand wash, it could be a mobile, meaning I actually bring everything to you when we do it in the parking lot of your office. The other option is what products are washed. It could be cars, trucks, houses, could be clothes, could be dogs. What kind of equipment is used? Could be sprays, it could be stalls, things to hold the car or the truck or the dog. It could be, you need dryers. You got to dry what it is you're washing. You need brushes. So what are all the equipment that would be used? And then what are some other products that you could sell that are related to the wash itself? So related products, novelties, books, edible goods while people are waiting for the wash. So now that you've listed, again, method, products washed, equipment, and products sold, and under each one have identified all the variations, now you can connect the dots. So let's run through this list once as just one example. So for a method, let's say it's a self-wash. For the products wash, let's say it's pets, dogs, cats, gerbils, or whatever the pet is. Then you need equipment. You need to have sprays, stalls, dryers, brushes, and then maybe the additional products you would sell, additional things that are related to pet washing. So now you have an idea for a new business that is a self-wash setup that is for dogs or pets, that someone can come in, they can basically save the money, they don't have the mess in their house, they can bring the pet, set it there, do a complete self-wash. It has everything there, including the sprayers, stalls, the dryers, brushes, everything's being provided. And then in addition to that, you can sell related goods, which would be shampoos, those kinds of things. So think of the kind of the self-serve car wash, but designed specifically for your pet. And so here, in a relatively short period of time, once you've defined the parameters and once you've defined the variations, here in the last 10 minutes, coming up with an entirely new business idea. Now this can be applied to pretty much any ideas that you're working on. And what I've done in the past when I've applied this is when I'm working on a new idea and I've gone through kind of a killer innovation workshop and I've got these great ideas, and you kind of have that nagging voice in the back of your head that is saying, hey, there might be one more variation to the idea that could really be the breakthrough, that could really just blow this out. But how do I find all those variations? So what I will do is I'll take the top ideas that come ranked out of a killer innovation workshop, and I'll apply the Da Vinci method to those ideas. How do I break down the parameters of that idea? What are all the variations of that parameter in such a way that I can then run through that list and literally come up with hundreds of variations based on the top ranked killer idea? One, just to satisfy that nagging thought that I've looked exhaustively at all the variations that are out there to make sure that I'm going down a path that collectively the team feels is going to generate that real killer innovation, a killer breakthrough. Okay? So again, try the method. It does work. There's been a lot of books. There's this Da Vinci method has been documented a variety of different ways. Some have have a very defined method of how you define the functions or the parameters. How do you define the variations of each of those parameters? But rather than getting caught up in the legalistic method that a lot of other players or a lot of the writers or uh, gurus in the innovation and creativity space define it, play with it a little bit. Use it and apply it to the way that fits your mode of thinking and your mode of operation. And what I have done is I get a big pad of paper, and across the top I list the different parameters. Under each one, I list the variations of that parameter, and then I literally circle and connect the dots, running through that list left to right, to then come up, and then on a separate piece of paper, when I see one that's interesting, I start drafting out kind of a business scenario of that service or product actually existing and how that might actually be used by customers. Moving on to segment 2, this week rather than talking about a weak signal, I'm going to talk about a new book that has just come out. It's by Anthony Ulwick, and the title of the book is What Customers Want. I believe it's a Wiley book. Oh, excuse me, it's a McGraw-Hill book. I literally have just picked this up. As many of you know, I'm a ferocious reader, but I'm actually falling behind. I'm still reading Kelly's new book, The 10 Faces of Innovation. I've now picked up this one. My wife is now clearly giving me dirty looks as I am hoarding books, and hopefully here over the holiday break, we'll be able to keep up or actually get caught up a little bit on the reading. But I had seen a review of this book in one of the more recent magazines, but I don't remember which magazine it was. I was at a Borders bookstore here in Washington, D.C. yesterday, stumbled across it in the business section, and thumbed through it and made the decision to buy it. And I've actually just gotten through kind of the first set of the introduction. But basically, the precept of what Anthony is proposing is using what he calls an outcome-driven innovation process to create what he calls the breakthrough products and services. And I'm just going to walk through the basic, what he calls this outcome-driven innovation process, just to kind of give you a little bit of a context of his view of innovation. And then if you're interested, then you can look up the book and buy it for yourself. It's actually a new book. It's just been published, so its copyright is 2005. Anthony Ulwick is the CEO of Stratagen Incorporated. It's basically an innovation consulting company. Its customers have included Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, Hewlett-Packard, Chiquita Brands, and lots of other companies. Harvard Business Review has recognized his work as kind of being one of the best business ideas for 2002. So Anthony's kind of one of those new and upcoming gurus in the whole innovation space. So the basic process for this outcome-driven innovation process is broken into two areas. One, first is to identify the opportunities, and then the second phase is to what he calls address the opportunities. So identifying the opportunities is broken into 5 steps. The first is what he calls formulate the innovation strategy. So this is the whole concept of what is it you're driving to from an organizational perspective of driving innovation within your business. 2 is to capture the customer inputs. So after you've identified the innovation strategy, or what I would call the broad innovation areas within your business, then capturing customer inputs. Now, there's a whole variety of doing that, and as you know, I'm not a big fan for doing focus groups or customer surveys. But Anthony actually proposes some fairly innovative ways to not get caught up in expecting the customer to be able to define to you what the actual product is. Step 3 is to identify the opportunities. Where are the customer's problems? Where are the unmet needs? Etc. 4 then is to segment the market. Now, this becomes the big challenge that I constantly run into. Management always wants you to be able to define that if you invest $10 million here in innovation, that you're going to generate 250 or 500 million in innovation 3, 4, 5 years down. When you're doing truly breakthrough killer innovations, it's very hard to identify clearly defined market segments when you're coming up with something totally new. But Anthony does present some very innovative ideas on how to identify severely overserved markets or what he calls severely underserved markets. And these are the two categories that tend to get overlooked that potentially you can break into. And then 5 is to define what we call targeting strategy. What's the opportunity? What are the potential segments? And therefore, how do you become very, very focused, laser focused on targeting that innovation to really serve the marketplace that has the greatest upside potential? So, steps 1 through 5 is to identify the opportunities. Steps 6 through 8 is how do you address the opportunities. So in step 6, position your current offerings. You may already have something, so here's a place where you may have identified an opportunity, you may have identified the segment, you may have identified the targeting, and then you already may have something in your hip pocket that you can apply. I mean, the ultimate win is that you have to put zero development work in, zero modifications, zero advertising change. You already have intellectual properties with a high barrier to entry, and you basically dominate a new segment that nobody else has been able to identify. So again, 6, position your current offerings. 7, prioritize your development pipeline. Now this in the past you've heard me refer to as the innovation pipeline. So, these are things that to identify kind of those next step things that you can do to identify innovations that will give you that lock-in potential or the ability to have those killer innovations. And then 8, define the breakthrough concepts. So what innovations or what pieces need to be brought together that are going to allow you to really create or define those breakthrough concepts. So again, steps 1 through 8. Step 1, formulate your innovation strategy. Where's the broad area of innovation that you're going to focus into? 2, capture your customer inputs. 3, identify the opportunities. 4, segment the market. 5, define your targeting strategy. 6, position your current offerings. 7, prioritize your development pipeline. And 8, define the breakthrough concept, or what we would call that killer innovation. So again, I've just started this book. The book is titled What Customers Want by Anthony Ulwick. He's the CEO of Stratagen. It's published by McGraw-Hill. It's only been out for about 2 or 3 weeks, I believe. Given the endorsements on the back from everybody from Microsoft to Johnson & Johnson to Motorola, obviously a lot of people are fully endorsing this book. I have not completed the reading of it. I'm hoping to do so over the weekend. But again, it's a brand new book. You may want to try to pick this one up as just one more to have on your shelf. And again, the concept is using outcome-driven innovation to create breakthrough products and services. Moving on to segment 3, this week's killer question. We're going to build upon the Da Vinci method that we talked about in segment 1. And this week's killer question is how else can this be accomplished? Again, how else can this be accomplished? So applying the Da Vinci method, let's use an example of creating breakthrough innovation for the common toaster. Now, for those of you in other parts of the world, toaster is basically dropping in a slice of bread, pushing down the lever. It basically cooks your bread to make toast. It pops up. You put butter, jam, marmalade on it, and use it typically for breakfast. So in the case here, let's say your management's come to you and says they want you to create a killer innovation around the common toaster. So step 1 is using the Da Vinci method, list the attributes on a sheet of paper for what you've defined today as a toaster. So first one, it's typically made of metal or plastic. Second one is it uses an outside power source. The third, it operates by pushing a lever up and down. The fourth, a toast pops up when it's done. Fifth is it has heated coils. And let's say the sixth is to toast bread vertically. Now, applying this week's killer question, for each of these descriptors of a toaster, ask yourself the question, how else can this be accomplished? So, how else can this be accomplished? Well, the first attribute was it's made of metal or plastic. Well, could you make it out of glass, for instance? So you'd have a see-through glass toaster. Second one, it uses an outside power source. So how else could this be accomplished? Well, could you have it battery operated so that you could use it someplace where you don't have a power source, out camping, for instance? Or could you have it so that rather than plugging into a normal wall outlet, it plugs into your cigarette lighter so you could actually make toast in your car on the way to the office in the morning? Third attribute, operated by pushing a lever down. Well, what happens if you had the lever go sideways, left or right, or you turned a dial rather than the lever being the mechanism of moving the toast in or out? Next attribute, the toast pops up when it's done. So again, how else can this be accomplished? Well, maybe you have the actual toast go left to right. So you actually feed the toast into the left, and it actually comes out the right, and you set your plate there, and the toast drops right onto the plate. Next attribute, it uses heated coils. So how else could this be accomplished? Well, you could get really exotic. Why not use lasers? That would definitely give you some nice toast. Light bulbs, using bright LEDs rather than using an electric exposed heating coils. One area to think about in the heating coils is, could you make the toaster safer? Invariably the little kid's trying to stick the fork in to dig the toast out because it didn't pop up correctly. The last attribute, it toasts the bread vertically. So in this case, again, maybe use the left to right, and rather than doing vertically, it does it horizontally. It does both sides. Think of it like a laser printer or a copy machine, and the toast follows a path. It comes up from the bottom and it comes out on the top. Maybe you preload it and the bread follows a set path, and by the time it's out, it's evenly toasted on all sides. And again, this week's killer question is how else can this be accomplished? And the key with the Da Vinci method is it's forcing you to look beyond the form and function of a toaster. Look at the features, look at what defines a toaster, and then look at each of those attributes and ask yourself the question, how else can this be accomplished? With that, let's go ahead and wrap up. Thanks for listening. Remember to vote. Visit podcastelliot.com. It's the easiest way for you to say thanks to your favorite podcast. Keep the feedback coming. You can email me at podcast@killerinnovations.com. I do apologize. I'm running a little behind in responding to emails. I've been offline pretty much this whole week running around. But I'll try to catch up, and I'll definitely be doing a lot of email replies during the holiday season here. Also, you feel free to call the voicemail feedback line at 703-636-4460. At the end of this podcast, remember, I'm going to play recent audio feedback messages. I know I've got one. If I have more, there'll be more at the end. But stay tuned and listen into the feedback. If you have audio feedback, send me an email and I'll play it in an upcoming podcast. Again, thanks for all of your support. I've gotten a lot of emails and a lot of encouragement. I really do appreciate it. I know things are a little crazy because of my new position. I'm moving into a new job function during my day job, which is taking up a lot of time. So I know the podcasts have been a little chaotic here on the timing, but hopefully after the first of the year, then I'll be able to get back onto a normal schedule. So again, thanks for listening. Get subscribed. You can get subscribed by visiting Apple iTunes. You can visit the podcast section on Yahoo, or you can visit the killerinnovations.com site and subscribe directly. Get others to subscribe. We'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Hey, Phil. Jonathan Wolfman calling, longtime listener. I was just listening to podcast number 31, and I had the idea that you spend a little time in the front orienting new users, new listeners. You're always going to get them, and you've done it a couple of times. I think it would be really great to create a specific podcast as sort of like a new listener orientation. You could even update it every so often with like a little synopsis of each show, and then just get right down to the Killer Innovation Podcast for us longtime listeners. Thanks a lot. Bye.